The anime starts with our zesty main protagonist, Will, who was born into a world where magic reigns supreme, yet he had no magical abilities of his own. Determined to become the strongest magician, he chose to battle every monster in the dungeon with his sword. Living in a society that values magic above all, Will's lack of magical talent didn't discourage him. He enrolled in a prestigious academy, facing the challenge of succeeding in an environment where magic is everything. To overcome his disadvantage, Will honed his sword skills and regularly ventured into high-level dungeons, confronting giant beasts that attacked him with magical spells. He deftly dodged their attacks, using his incredible speed and swordsmanship to stylishly defeat them with a single slash. The next morning, an exhausted Will attended class, where Professor Edward taught the basics of alchemy, including the production of sulfur for explosives. Edward noticed Will was dozing off and called his name, startling him awake. Summoned to the front of the class to demonstrate the process, Will reluctantly took out his wand and attempted to conjure flames to create sulfur. However, to his dismay, not even a spark appeared, prompting laughter from his classmates. Edward then silenced them, looking at Will with disgust as he couldn't fathom how Will excelled in theory but failed in practical magic, questioning how he was even accepted into the academy. Suddenly, a cocky red-haired boy named Cheyenne used his wand to effortlessly produce flames and sulfur, while Will cowered behind the fire. However, Edward warned against unauthorized magic use and demonstrated the creation of a large crystal of sulfur, emphasizing that magic is paramount and essential for survival at the academy. He then advised those incapable of controlling magic to leave. After class, Cheyenne and his glazers taunted Will, mocking his ability to only defeat low-level dungeon monsters. But Will's childhood friend Cole intervened and defended Will's character, telling Cheyenne to back off. However, Cheyenne dismissed Cole's words, claiming that kindness and hard work were useless without magic, before walking away with his group. As Cole and Will walked together, Cole tried to reassure him and Will seemed accustomed to the bullying. Gazing at the sky, he soon commented on its beauty. The scene then shifts to years ago, where humans were trapped in darkness, living in fear of evil spirits who cast a shadow over the world. Suddenly, 5 legendary mages, known as Magiavanders, fought the spirits and freed humanity, revealing the sky for the first time. This title now belongs to the world's most powerful mages. This story made Will recall a promise he made to his childhood friend, Elfie, who inspired him with storybooks about the Magiavanders, and they vowed to become Magiavanders together. Elfie, possessing remarkable talent, fulfilled her promise and quickly rose to become the youngest Magiavander in history, now residing in the Divine Tower. However, Will turned out to be far below average, barely holding onto his dream and the promise he made. Later that day, he met with Professor Work, who angrily berated him for venturing into level 7 dungeons alone, warning him that he was risking his life. Will quickly bent over and apologized, but asked if he would receive credit for his efforts. With a sigh, he awarded him 2 credits. Work then asked if he still hadn't given up on becoming a Magiavander. He explained that to have even a small chance, Will needed to get admitted to the Upper Institute, which required a lot of credits in spell work, writing, and fighting. Without the ability to use spells, he would never get credits for spell work, making it impossible to qualify. However, Will declared that he would keep trying, but Work informed him that he needed 4 more credits by the end of the week to graduate. This shocked Will, who immediately started searching for monsters that could earn him 4 credits. Playfully, he then mentioned a monster called Baskerville on the 6th floor that hadn't been defeated yet. Hearing this, Will hugged his teacher, but unbeknownst to them, Cheyenne overheard and decided to head to the dungeon himself to kill the monster and get Will expelled for not having enough credits. Later that evening, Will entered the cave with his familiar, Kiki, instructing her to use her nose to find the monster. But Kiki hesitated, remembering how she was burned by a Baskerville's breath the last time. Meanwhile, Cheyenne and his glazers entered the 6th floor, determined to find the beast before Will. Soon, one of Cheyenne's underlings, a pink-haired boy, questioned the wisdom of just 3 mages entering the 6th floor, but Cheyenne angrily claimed he was one of the best mages in the class and could handle it. He ordered his underlings to use their scan magic to locate the beast. Suddenly, a huge monster appeared and gave the spiky-haired boy a back shot so hard he became one with the wall. Cheyenne was paralyzed with shock while the pink-haired boy screamed in terror. Will, having heard the scream, immediately rushed toward the noise, worried someone was hurt. After turning a corner, he saw Cheyenne on the floor, futilely shooting his tiny fireballs at a monster. Will recognized it as the Sentinel, an extremely strong monster worth 10 credits, and wondered what it was doing on this dungeon level. Realizing that Cheyenne's magic was ineffective, he watched as the monster ignored the flames and advanced on the terrified boy. Initially, Will considered helping, but remembered all the times Cheyenne had ridiculed him. He wanted to close his eyes and pretend he hadn't seen it. However, he recalled Elfie, who once told him he was the kindest person she knew and had gifted him a pair of glasses. This memory reminded him of who he truly was. He then put on the glasses, blocking the monster's attack just in time, and forced it away, saving Cheyenne's life. Back at the academy, Edward entered Work's room and urgently told him to send his familiar into the dungeons, as Cheyenne and his lackeys had gone to the 6th floor without permission. Work soon realizes what has happened but reassures Edward, noting that Will is also on the same floor. Back in the dungeon, Will clashes with the monster repeatedly, blocking its attacks and outmaneuvering it before swiftly slicing off one of its fingers. The enraged monster attempts to strike again, but Will dodges, moving through the air swiftly. However, the monster finally catches Will, but he blocks the blow with his sword, getting blasted back. The monster then hurls rocks at him, which he effortlessly slashes through. Seeing an opening, Will leaps around the monster, landing on its back and stabs it through the neck, while Cheyenne watches in shock, stunned by Will's abilities. Back at the academy, Edward is also stunned, while Work explains that although Will is an outcast with no magic, he possesses superhuman strength for a mage, the resilience of a dwarf, and a mind so sharp he can learn any attack pattern just by observing it once. They watch as Will slashes off the monster's arm and calmly walks toward a giant buster sword on the ground, picking it up effortlessly. Work turns to Edward, noting that in a world dominated by magic and wizards, Will is the lone warrior. The monster then shoots an energy beam from its mouth, but Will blocks it again with the giant sword and slashes the monster into pieces. The monster soon falls to the ground, lifeless, and Will approaches Cheyenne, extending a helping hand to the still shocked boy. Back at the academy, Edward, unable to believe his eyes, screams at Work, insisting that someone without magic can never surpass a magician, and storms out of the room. 5 years ago, when Will was 10, he was humiliated by all his schoolmates. Many believed he had only been brought to the academy to attract Lady Elfaria, but now that she had become a Magiavander, they felt Will was no longer needed at the school, especially since he couldn't use magic. Among everyone at the institution, only Professor Work supported him, accompanying him to a meeting with Cauldron Anuv, the headmistress of the academy. There, Will was presented with a sword but was immediately attacked by numerous spells. He threw the professor aside and dealt with each attack. Seeing this, Cauldron allowed Will to continue attending the academy, noting that a sword trying to be a wand was quite an interesting case. Will then asked if he would be allowed to climb the tower if he continued studying, but Cauldron explained that he needed extraordinary willpower to pursue that goal. In the present, in one of his classes, Work teaches that climbing the tower means advancing to the higher institute to become a Magiavander, who reigns on the top floor of the Mercedes Colleges and are recognized by the highest center of learning, the higher institute. There are 2 main methods to advance, creating a new type of magic or earning at least 7,200 credits at the academy. Since few can achieve the first option, most strive for the second. However, graduation itself is not easy, and that's why Work offers so many extra classes. After one of these classes, Colette comments that the professor is being tough on the students. Will also notices this himself, as he is in disaster with magic and needs to focus entirely on earning credits to survive at the academy. However, he believes Work does this for everyone's benefit, wanting everyone to have a chance to graduate. But Colette thinks that Professor Edward doesn't have the same dedication to giving extra classes and agrees with Will's perspective. As they walked down the hallway, they saw Lyral Mars boasting that Cheyenne had defeated an evil sentinel, trying to steal the credit from the true slayer of the powerful beast. There, everyone in the group admired the young prodigy's false feat, but Cheyenne knew it wasn't true. In reality, he had been saved by the last person he would want to owe anything to, Will, whom he had humiliated all his life. As Will passed through the corridor, Cheyenne broke through the circle and grabbed Will by the collar, incredulous that someone he considered talentless could perform such a feat. Seeing this, Colette intervened, telling Cheyenne to stop. But as Cheyenne wanted to punch Will, he restrained himself and let him go. As he walked away, his glazers followed him, and Colette asked if there was any conflict between them to cause such a reaction. Will then replies that there was, but brushes it off as nothing major. Later, Edward tried to convince the headmistress to expel Will, arguing that a warrior should not be accepted at an institution known for training the greatest mages in existence. He claimed it was impossible for someone to graduate without being able to use magic. Cauldron, however, noted that Will had excellent writing grades and his reports were so insightful that he stood out academically. Taking this into consideration, Cauldron suggested that Will could be a healer or an artificer even if he didn't become a Magiavander. She reminded the staff that the school's duty was to train and educate scholars for the fateful day. But Edward countered, arguing that Will had no intention of becoming a scholar, only a Magiavander. However, Cauldron acknowledged that this was a problem, so she asked Edward to test the student as he had discovered Will's secret. The headmistress then placed Will's promotion or expulsion in Edward's hands. but Edward questioned if that was truly what she wanted, pointing out that he's not as forgiving as work. She wanted Edward to test Will thoroughly and determine the truth for himself, noting that as the Dark Viper Mage, Edward was uniquely suited to evaluate potential Mangiavanders. Meanwhile, Will needed Colette's help just to open his locker, as he is unable to use the simplest magic to unlock it. Ironically, despite his unique abilities, Will couldn't carry his sword on campus, and if he returned to the dormitory, his roommate would never let him leave. However, Colette remarked that they seemed to get along well, but Will unconvincingly responded that it was just a normal relationship. Later in the study room, Will read about the Battle of Garzaranzo in the year 344 of the magical era. In this conflict, the dwarves, a race from another world, rebelled against exploitation and mistreatment worse than that of the elves, forming an army to free themselves. Seeing Will study something he had reviewed numerous times, Colette tried to give him a hint. However, he was intentionally analyzing the historical context from other races' perspectives. Colette soon praised Will's writing talent but thought he didn't mean to try so hard. Nonetheless, Will didn't want to lose a single credit and miss his chance to fulfill his dream. He understood that the dwarves' perspective in the battle was valuable, as it showed they could fight despite powerful magic, resonating with Will's daily experiences at school, while also mentioning that one of the dwarves' sayings from the war was to never give up, which Will took to heart. However, Edward suddenly arrived to summon Will for the test in the spell hall. The teacher explained he was there to personally assess Will's worth, ordering him to land a single blow. If he succeeded, he would receive 5 credits, but if he failed, he would be expelled. He notes that he believed those without talent for sorcery shouldn't consider becoming a Mangiavander. Simultaneously, Headmistress Cauldron called Work, revealing the confrontation happening at that moment. She warned Work not to interfere, explaining how she allowed him to make special interventions with Will outside the regular curriculum. Edward also had the right to implement his method. Being such a respected mage, Work found this test unfair, knowing Edward was the man who almost became a Mangiavander. Back at the hall, Edward cast powerful spells against the inexperienced student, who dodged as best he could. Even though they were low-level dark magics, they still had unmatched potency. With his place at the school at stake, Will didn't want to fall behind, advancing with his above-average speed. Despite this, Edward's defense was impenetrable, and he protected himself without moving, maintaining distance through his magic. Edward then continued to disdain the student, reaffirming that he was hopeless. With that said, Edward cast a spell that shattered Will's glasses, and he soon noticed that Edward was casting spells without reciting, activating them with frightening speed. As if that weren't enough, Will started coughing up blood, his body's fatigue telling him he wouldn't even be able to scratch his rival. With Will on the ground, Edward warned that he would only use 2 spells, his black flames to burn and his shield to repel the boy's unpleasant savagery. Quoting one of the Academy's doctrines, Edward taught that a student incapable of mastering 1,000 spells should strive to master a single one, which would become like 1,000 arrows. With that, Edward layered several spells into one, creating an endless spiral of magic before unleashing it all on Will, stating that those without talent should disappear. The series of spells relentlessly hit Will with brutal force, leaving him no chance to react. For the first time, Will faced a high-level mage and couldn't even wield his sword in this test. Back in the locker room, Colette wondered if her friend was okay, suspecting Edward's test was more like a torture session. But suddenly, Kiki appeared, bleeding and scratching at Will's locker, so Colette opened it to see what the familiar wanted to convey. Meanwhile, Edward took advantage of Will's study of the Dwarf Rebellion to ask how many mages it took to exterminate the 10,000 dwarves. Without letting Will answer, he informed him that only 1 sorcerer was enough because that's how the world works. Edward believed Will should give up his stupid dream. However, despite the world's harshness, Will made it clear he didn't intend to give up. Holding the glasses given by Elfaria, he stated that he wanted to be by the side of the person he loved, fulfilling the promise he made to her. But Edward found this desire dirty and immoral, claiming a pathetic love couldn't be the motivation to aspire to the pinnacle of sorcery. Ignoring the teacher's insults, Will assured that he would see the sunset with his friend. At that moment, guided by Kiki, Colette threw the sword to Will and the feared blade of Moria cut through Edward's spell. Mercilessly, the teacher unleashed a new magical onslaught, engulfing Will's body like a purple inferno. As Will's arms and legs trembled, he was certain that he would be burned alive in the middle of the school. Initially, he thought of running away, but doing so meant his definitive expulsion from the academy and the end of his dream. Therefore, he advanced through the magical obstacles, using his blade as a torch in the darkness. Reflecting on the Battle of Garzaranzo, Will recalled that a brave dwarf general named Gareth had fought even after losing all his brothers, striking a single blow against the enemy mage. In honor of his bravery, the mages began to recognize the dignity of the Dwarf Rebellion. That day became known as the day the sword overcame the wand. as if he were Gareth, Will used his skills to break through Edward's blockade and make his face bleed with the sharp blade of Moria. Indignant, Edward withdrew and granted the 5 credits as a reward. Back in the headmistress's office, Cauldron and Work analyzed Will's brilliantly executed strategy and acknowledged his fearlessness. That night, in the vicinity of the Magic Academy, someone prepared a meal, waiting for Will to join them for dinner. This then concludes the second episode's recap of this anime. If you enjoyed this video and want more of it, go ahead and hit that like button down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you everyone for helping us in reaching 5,000 subscribers. Let's continue to grow this community and help us reach a new goal of 10,000 subscribers.